with another edition of the Cheap Heat Productions Wrestling Podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling, and we have a man on the show today who has an impressive 30-year plus tenure in the world of professional wrestling as one of the top referees in the business. He's worked NWA, WWF, and so many more with a whole whack of interesting stories. And that would be Mr. Dave Dwinell. But before we get to Dave, I have to introduce, as per the custom, Mr. Cheap Heat, Mr. Politician, Mr. Public Servant in Waiting, Maurice. Maurice, how are you, sir?
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and really looking forward to the show today. And thanks a million to our special guest, Dave, and thanks to Jack for that lovely introduction. Very unnecessary, but lovely all the same.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Dave, we're going to start off on a current topic and all this stuff that Vince McMahon has seemingly gone from WWE forever. What's your kind of reaction to that and experiences with the man in the past?
Well, it's a funny thing. I've had very little to do with him. I worked at Madison Square Garden about 13, 14 times, and I had very little to do with him. Back in the 80s and 90s, when I worked with the WWE, because they had to use state officials, I was a New York State licensed official. I was licensed in Jersey and several other states, and they had to use state officials. Well, back in the 80s and 90s, Vince McMahon would walk in with a gray pinstripe suit, gray sneakers, sit in the gorilla position in front of a monitor and watch the show. He would let Pat Patterson, Arnie Skoland, the Chief, Rene Goulet, whoever happened to be, mostly Pat Patterson. He trusted Pat because Pat had a great wrestling knowledge of how to put forth a story in a match. So he would always see me at the Garden and he would say, "Good evening, sir. How are you?" And I would say, "Fine, thank you, sir. How are you?" And he'd say, "Very well." And that was it. That's the majority of the time I had, because most of the shows I worked with the WWF, Vince did not show up at. He had his lieutenants, Pat Patterson, as I mentioned, some of the others. They would show up. And in those days, the WWF would run shows in high schools. I mean, can you imagine Roman Reigns coming to a local high school in wrestling, in front of several hundred people? But they did it in those days because it wasn't the product it is today. And Vince would not show up at those shows, and they were a lot more fun because the brass, like Arnie, who I was very friendly with, they would be much looser. So I didn't have a whole lot. However, to show you how things changed, in 1990 or 91, my last show in the Garden, I was walking down the hallway at Madison Square Garden, and this man almost runs me over. And he said, "Excuse me, ref, sorry." It was Vince McMahon. He had become part of the show. He was no longer the man sitting in a gorilla position, allowing others. He had evolutionized into becoming part of the show. But I will say this. I can only judge people on how they treated me and what I saw of them. I'm not going to, people could judge me. I could judge you. That's not my role. WWF and wrestling was very good to me. They paid very well at the Garden, okay? And they didn't have to use me. They used me. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about Vince and say the guy's no good, he's a lowlife. I never saw that side of him, okay? I've read the papers. I see what's going on. I've heard rumors. But again, I don't think it's up to me to be judgmental of him, because, and this isn't a cop-out. This is just when somebody allows you to do something from 1982 to 1990, which he allowed me to do. He could have said, I don't want this guy Dave on the show. He's not a very good referee. So he was good to me in the sense that he allowed me to work. And again, I had very little to do with him. I think, also maybe like everyone who's famous, eventually things start snowballing and, there's a lot of gossip going on. I'm sure some of it may be true and some is not true. But again, it's not really up to me to judge other people, especially people that have been good to me. That's why in the book, I wrote the book Ring Man. I didn't throw anybody under the bus. Why do that? I mean, that's not my spot. That's not my place to throw somebody under the bus just to sell a few more books. So it may be, I hope you don't think it's a cop out, but I'm being honest when I say this, that I never had a problem with the man, and he was always very kind and very cordial to me in our relationship. So I'm not going to badmouth him. I'll leave that for others to do.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well,
Dave.
that's just saying there, Jack, that's his personal experience, and that has to be respected as well. So, that's fine.
I was going to say, Dave, that seems to be the consensus. We've had the pleasure of interviewing many folks who worked, during various stages of Vince's extensive tenure in WWF, WWE, and they have all said that he was nothing but a kind person and a gentleman. So I can understand, how your response is. You take people as they present to you, for sure.
Right, like the fabulous Moolah, so much has been written about her. Anytime I worked with her, she was a delight and she was lovely to me. So I don't know how she reacted with other people or what she did with other people. But again, I don't think I should be judgmental because I never saw that side. I'm not saying there isn't another side to Vince. There isn't another side to Moolah, which obviously many people feel there is. But again, I can only go on what I've seen, and Moolah was always a pleasure to work with, and so I can't speak badly of them because I never saw another side of them.
Backing up the tape though, and we want to talk about your excellent book, Ring Man, and give the fans the information that they need to pick it up. But when you started in the professional wrestling industry, what were the circumstances that put that into play, and how did you learn the very important art of being a referee?
Well, I probably am the only referee who ever stepped foot in a ring without ever having talked to a wrestler, didn't know which ropes to climb through, had no idea, because this was kayfabe era, had no idea if it was fake or real. I was I was politically connected, and I mean, how I got the license was funny. If I could just tell the story, how I got into the business. I was watching wrestling on TV with some friends, and I said, "Gee, the ref's doing a tough job. It doesn't do a very good job." And he goes, "Yeah, you could do better." And I said, "Yeah, I think it could." I said, "Well, why don't you?" I said, "I think I will." So I decided to call it WWF. So I couldn't find him in the phone book. There was no internet or anything. So I no Google or anything. So I found out they were under Capital Wrestling. I called the operator, find out Capital Wrestling. So I called about 20 times. 21st time a guy picks up, and he made Marlon Brando's voice in The Godfather sound like a choir girl. I don't know who it was. It might have been Toots Mondt. And I said, "Is this the WWF?" And he goes, "Who wants to know?" And I said, "David Dwinell. What do you want?" I said, "Well, I'd like to be a referee." "We don't need any referees." I said, "Well, can I send you a resume?" "Don't send me any gifts, kid. I don't need no gifts. We don't need you. Goodbye." And hung up. I said, "Gee, that went well, But I wasn't giving up. So I looked up where they were located. Now, I was working at the Trade Center in New York City at the time. And I found out that they listed an address in Midtown Manhattan. So it turned out to be the Holland Hotel. So every lunchtime I went up there looking for somebody from the WWF. Well, after about 2 weeks of going up there for an hour and a half at lunchtime, the doorman comes out and he says, "Excuse me, are you a cop, a private eye, Secret Service, a stalker, or are you just a nut?" And I go, "Well, I'm looking for somebody from the WWF." He goes, "They're only here once a month. There's no office here." It was kind of a sham office. "They're only here once a month for the garden, and get out of here or I'll have you arrested for stalking." So I said, "Well, it's just not going to work." Until I met a fellow who I was the master ceremonies for our church's 100th anniversary, and I found a guy who knew boxing and wrestling, and I told him what I wanted to do. He said, come over to my office. So I drove up and down the street 10 times. His office was a hot dog truck. And he said, you got to be licensed by the state. He goes, I know some state people. You were an athletic director early in your career. We'll see what we could do. So a couple of the people from New York State recommended me. So I get an application in the mail, and then I get a license in the mail. But they never let me work. So I get down to the athletic commission, and they said, oh, well, we'll get to you shortly. And they never got to me. So I went down and started yelling. The boss comes out, and he talked to him, and he says, we'll give you a shot. So I was assigned to work in front of 4,500 people at a WWF show at the county center. Rocky Johnson was in the main event. I think The Rock was there because it was Christmas time. And I show up at the county center, and I knew Arnold Skolin because I used to have breakfast with him sometime at a local coffee shop. He lived near me, and I used to love talking wrestling. So I show up, never having talked to a wrestler, never having stepped foot in a ring, and never having officiated a match. And here I am in front of 4,500 people going, this could be a problem. If they don't like me, maybe they'll throw me out of the ring. So Arnie goes, go up and talk to Roz. It's getting late. So I'm walking up the stairs, and I'm going, what do I talk about? The weather? How's the family? Is wrestling fake? You know, because 80% of the people in the arena thought it was real. So I walk in, and Johnny saw me, and he goes, our first show, kid, huh? And I go, how'd you know? He goes, I know. Sit down. And he started talking about our match, and he made me an integral part. He turned out to be my mentor later on in life, but I'd never gone to a wrestling school. I just watched tapes. I watched 50 tapes before I went to the first match. And Johnny got me involved in a ring. He was being disqualified against 21-year-old Eddie Gilbert. So I go in the ring. Johnny pushes me. I push him. Johnny pushes me. I push him. And I threaten to fine him $1,000 by New York State if he doesn't stop hitting me. And people popped in the audience. And from that point on, I just 32 years later, I was still working. But wow. It was kind of an unusual story.
Very.
Was it what you expected when you first stepped in there? Because I know you weren't sure of the real elements and so on, but what was the most difficult thing about that?
The ring was smaller than I thought. It looked much smaller than on TV. No place to really hide. Also, in those days, the ring was canvas, and it had ripples by the end of the matches. It was tied canvas. It wasn't the beautiful rings they have today. So for my second show, after my first show, I had mat burns on both knees, bad. So for my second show, I bought large knee pads, wrestling knee pads. So that was a little bit of a surprise. I guess having taught in a former life, you kind of block out the kids and teach. Well, I guess I blocked out the audience because I said, I can't pay attention to the audience or I'm going to get hurt. And I had watched enough videos to see where the ref stood, what he did, what he tried not to overact or get in the way. And I guess I was just very fortunate that Johnny took me under his wing and went through the match and told me exactly. We had to give time in those days. All the matches were timed. So the fellow at the bell would go like this, and that would be, I'd have to tell the wrestlers 5 minutes. This would be 10 minutes. And when it was time to go home, he might put a pencil in his mouth. Howard Finkel at the Garden used to put a pencil in his mouth when it was time for me to tell the fellas to go home because everything was timed. So, yeah, and it was much harder in those days than today for the refs because I had to be, as Johnny said, I had to be the sheriff. I had to give law and order. There were rules that had to be followed to give it more of a sporting event. And we had to count wrestlers out if they were outside the ring. Today, guys are outside the ring for 15 minutes and there's no count out. So there's no rule of a count out. There's 3 guys can come in a ring and beat a guy up and a ref just stands there. So in those days, it was much more difficult. You had to add a legitimacy. And I'm not knocking today's refs. They're great. But you had to add a legitimacy to what was going on. So I was an integral part of the act that had to not favor the face or the heel, okay, that kind of a thing.
And you touched on it earlier in so much as you started in the era when the business was very protected and kayfabe was the rule of the day.
Right.
How did you get smartened up to the business? And part B of this question, what are your thoughts on the death of kayfabe when McMahon made his presentation to the Athletic Commission in the early 90s?
Well, two things. What the first part of the question was about kayfabe. What about? I'm sorry. Could you repeat the first part?
Just how you with the
Oh, how
business
I
being
found out
protected
that it
and how
was.
you got smartened up. Yeah.
Well, when I went into the locker room to talk to Johnny Rods, he said, "Let's go over our match." So we went over the whole match. We went over from start to finish. But what I think people don't realize about the kayfabe era that there was always the possibility of injury in the ring. So I mean, even though it might have been a prescribed match, they were telling stories a lot more in those days. And so I found out right away that it was kayfabe because we went over the entire match. He wanted me to know exactly what was going on in every aspect of the match. And I would always go in and talk to the wrestlers before the match in case I was going to be thrown out of the ring, what time, what was coming right before I was getting thrown out. Was I going to get knocked down? What were we doing? Was it going to, you don't want to screw up a finish in live TV at Madison Square Garden. So you got to know exactly kind of like what's going on. So I learned from my very first talk to Johnny that obviously the business was, but again, 80% of the people were smoking, drinking. You couldn't even see the ring when I'd walk out of the locker room. There was so much smoke in the arena. 80% were blue collar workers, smoking, drinking, believing it was real, betting on the matches in many cases. And then you also had white collar workers who would never admit that they were wrestling fans to anybody, but would come to the shows incognito because they enjoyed it. So I knew very early on. Now, when McMahon came out and said it's all prescribed, it's all kayfabe, Bruno was crushed. Bruno felt he could have said from a certain point on, there was no kayfabe, but that my matches were real. But he didn't do that. He said it's always been. And the reason he said there was no kayfabe was he wanted to get rid of the state officials like myself and use his own officials. And I can understand that. I was never bitter about that. I can understand he'd want to use the guys working with him all the time and not have us there. But that's why he really came out with it. But I think by that time, most people, because of the Meltzer and everybody, kind of knew that it was pretty much prescribed. So I think there were very few people that, thought it was real at that point. So I don't think he ruined anything for anybody. I was upset. I wasn't upset, but I was kind of like, it was kind of like when you found out there was no Santa Claus, for the first time. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. But I mean, yeah, you're right. You can't cut that out. I hope there's no kids listening. There wouldn't be that many young kids listening, hopefully. But at any rate, it kind of hurt a little bit.
I'm interested in that, what you said about the state commissions and Vince making that announcement to get rid of. So obviously there was a belief then that from the state bodies then that this was real and they had to implement their own officials. Is that the idea behind that?
Well, part of it was they treated it like boxing. When I started in 1982, they told me if a wrestler ever put his hands on me, disqualify him on the spot. I don't think so, because in my very first match, Johnny Rods and I pushed back and forth for a couple minutes, and the older ref, who was the senior ref on the show, yelled at me after the show for not disqualifying him. But the idea was I wasn't going to disqualify him because that wasn't the finish right away. We wanted to get into a little shoving match, but they treated it like boxing. The other thing was the state officials were people connected with the state. And when I started out, not many people wanted to be wrestling referees. They wanted to be boxing referees. But I can understand Vince not wanting us. I was fortunate enough that I worked with a lot of the big independents on the East Coast. So when Vince got to use their own men, the independents I was working for got to use me. So I continued for another from 2000. Let's see, I think it was 2000. He said, wasn't it? So I went another 15 years working a lot of shows for the independents who were using a lot of big names. The independents in those days used a lot of big names. So my career wasn't cut short by that, but almost all the state officials' career were cut short. But I was smart enough to realize, let me work with the independents. They liked the way I worked. I worked hard. And I think one of the keys why I stayed in the business so long is because I realized no one ever bought a ticket to see a ref. My job was to make the wrestlers look good. So I always tried to make them look good. And I figured if I did that, I'd stick around. And it worked because a lot of the wrestlers on the independents really enjoyed working with me. Even guys who some people think were difficult to work with. Sid Vicious, for example, people are always a little difficult to work with. Sid always asked for me whenever I was on a show with Sid, he would ask for me, and he'd always have a spot or two in there for me because he knew I loved the business, and he knew I would make him look good. So he wanted to make me look good. So, I think that's one of the reasons I stuck around is I used to get the first match at the Garden all the time, and I'd come out and half the crowd would be cheering and half the crowd would be booing. They'd be cheering because it was 8:00 and the show was starting, and they'd be booing because who cheers for a ref? So you got to keep things in perspective when you're the ref. You're not the reason people are there, but you're still an integral part of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Dave, some of the most interesting stories of the quote unquote golden era of wrestling involve fans that aren't smart to the business, disagreeing with, some of the happenings in the ring or the officials' calls, or even attacking wrestlers. Do you have any of those particular type of encounters?
The match in which I got the most heat ever, okay, County Center, about 4,500 people, a cold February night or March night. The doors of the County Center were wide open, all of them in the front. There was 100 people standing in the cold on the street wanting to see if the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov could win the belt back from Wyndham and Rotundo, okay? So you got 4,500 people drinking heavily, smoking. And the Sheik comes in the ring with the flag, and the Volkov comes in the ring with the flag. Well, all of a sudden, after about a minute, I see size D, the big flashlight batteries, flying by my head. People in the balcony are throwing them, the big ones. Okay. Mm-hmm. I feel something. I wore cutoff wrestling boots that were not laminated, just because you needed in those days a soft bottom to slide. You couldn't wear sneakers. Okay. So I had to cut off wrestling boots. Well, I feel something in my wrestling boot, and I look down, there's a dart sticking out of my wrestling boot. People were throwing darts in the audience. Okay. I got hit with plastic canisters of beer in the head, in the face, in the chest. And the Sheik's waving a flag in front of me, and I go, will you get the hell on the other side of the ring with that goddamn flag? I said, do not put that. Now the faces aren't even in the ring yet. Now, I knew it was getting bad because people were starting to charge the ring. They were closing the beer concessions. Okay. They didn't want to sell any more beer because they're afraid a riot was going to break out. And the faces aren't even in the ring yet. And there's garbage up to my ankles. So Wyndham and Rotundo get in the ring, and we're supposed to have a 20-minute match. And I called Wyndham and Rotundo, and in the middle of the ring, I told the guys, I said, if this match goes more than 6 minutes, I'm out of here. Because I'm not going to die in the middle of a wrestling ring. It's not worth it. And they agreed that it was really getting dangerous. They had 3 cops by the ringside, and people were charging the ring. They had chairs. They wanted to try to get in the ring. So after about 6 minutes, they went home. And I left with the faces.
Who went over?
Let's see. Wyndham picked up Volkov, and Rotundo dropped kick Volkov. Wyndham picked up Volkov to slam him, and Rotundo drop kicked Volkov. Wait a minute, no, I got that wrong. I'm sorry. Volkov picked up Wyndham. Okay, Volkov picked up Wyndham to slam him, and Rotundo drop kicked Wyndham onto Volkov. So Volkov fell backwards with Wyndham on him, and I counted to 3, and then we all get out of there. But that was, you talk about kayfabe and you talk about heat. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was unreal. I thought I was going to I thought I was going to die in a ring that night. I said, oh my God, this is like, but then again, that's part of the thing that excited me. There was an edge back in those days. You were working and there was an edge. You were trying like a passion play to get a reaction. You were always trying to get a reaction out of the fan. And boy, did we get a reaction out of the fan that night. Let me tell you.
I was reading some articles lately, and one of them said that you refereed some of the very early matches of the Ultimate Warrior. What was he like to work with?
I think I worked this 8th or 9th match, and it was at a small fair there might have been, I don't know, 300 or 400 people at the show, and I think he was still going under the name of the Dingo Warrior. Now, he hadn't been on TV yet at this point. He just brand new. And I don't take drugs, okay? So I wasn't high that night. But I swear, I swear that I said to Patterson, whoever was it might have been Skolin, I said, Patterson, I said, I don't even have to ask who is going over. He was wrestling Jerry Allen, a journeyman. I think Jerry Allen had 1 victory over Omar Atlas at the time. And he said, well, Allen's going over. I said, what? I said, no. I said, you're trying to get me fired with Vince. He said, no, Allen's going over. Now, it was a long time ago, but it's been known that Vince will take a guy at a very small show and see if he will take a pin.
Test him.
And if he won't, then Vince will get rid of him. So it's possible that night, the Warrior, but they never admitted it because they had him undefeated forever. But I'm not going to swear it happened, but I have this vague memory of this happening. And I remember the Warrior would run out to the ring. He ran out to the ring. And by the time he got in the ring, he was totally out of breath. He was gassed. And I'm going, oh my God, how are we going to have a match? This guy's gassed already. But again, don't hold me to that. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. And as I said, I don't take drugs. So I wasn't drugged that night. I'm not having some kind of drug dream or pipe dream, that happened. But and I worked the first match of Triple H in Madison Square Garden when he was Hunter Hearst Helmsley. It wasn't a televised match, but they did the same match a couple nights later for TV taping, and I wasn't the ref. But I did work his first match at Madison Square Garden. I worked some of the very early matches of the Hart Foundation, Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, The Undertaker, because I was the young ref, and they weren't the stars. They were the undercards when they came in. So the older refs wanted to take the guys on top. So they wanted to do the main event. So they said, Dave, there's a new guy here. You take him. He's the Undertaker. I says, all right, I'll take him. So I had a chance to work with a lot of these guys before anyone knew that they were famous, including Bam Bam Bigelow. I think I did one of his first public matches. He trained at Larry Sharp's school, the Monster Factory in Jersey. And I worked a lot with Johnny Rodz on the independent circuit. And he became my mentor. And I see this guy come in the locker room with these tattoos and flames on his head. I see this big, huge guy come in. I'm going, oh, God, this is going to be a horrible match. Mm-hmm. He says, hi, my name's Scott Bigelow, and I'm really nervous. There's got to be a couple hundred people out there at this high school, and I never worked in front of a crowd like this. And I said, oh, this is going to be horrible. Well, I never seen a big man make that many high spots in a show. So we came back to the locker room. He says, how'd I do? I said, you better not forget me when you become famous. Because I said, you are going to become famous because I said, for your size, you have phenomenal ability. And he never forgot me. He never forgot me. Anytime we were on a show, he picked me up and hugged me and picked me up off the ground. But I was very fortunate to work with so many wonderful, wonderful wrestlers when they first came into young Eddie. I mentioned him before. Eddie Gilbert, Kurt Hennig when he first came in, did many of his first matches, and just wonderful experiences that I will never forget. And who knew that they were going to become and go on to what they did go on to.
And you were right front and center during the national expansion, and of course the rise of the phenomenon known as Hulkamania. Did you have any notable interactions with Hulk, be it in the ring or otherwise?
Well, a couple. I had a show shortly after he won the championship from the Iron Sheik, and my good friend, the Iron Sheik. I love the Sheik. Him and I were very friendly. I got some great stories with him, but I was the only one in the locker room with him, and we were down there. He had just showered. I was getting ready to take a shower, and we're in the locker room, and the belt was on the bench next to him. And I shook his hand and I said, "Congratulations on winning the belt." And he said, "Thank you very much." And it was like two guys, very humble man at the time. And him and I were talking a little bit like two guys at work, and I had no idea he was going to become the phenomenon because he had just kind of won the belt. He kind of came out of nowhere. I wasn't sure. They were talking about turning the belt over and taking it off Bob, but I wasn't sure who was going to end up beating the Sheik. And he kind of came out of nowhere, but he was very impressive sitting on the bench there. And although I never worked any of his matches because Vince wanted either Dick Kroll, who was a senior official at the time with the state, or he wanted his own guys doing the championship matches because he was afraid, I suppose somebody could pay me off. Hey, I'll give you $10,000. Take the belt off Hogan. He tried to do that with the Sheik, by the way. Did you know that?
Vern did.
Yeah. Yeah. And but I did get involved in two of his matches. I did run-ins with another ref to try to save him in the ring because he was getting triple teamed after a match. So I did run in. I got it on tape. It was at the Garden. I ran in, and he's on his back, lying on his back, and I'm kneeling over him trying to help him, and I'm pointing a finger at him. I was going to take that picture and put it up in my office and put underneath it, "And if you get up, I'll hit you again." But I hope he's not listening. But at any rate, we put him on a gurney.
I doubt it.
We put him on a gurney, and I got outside the ring, and he jumped off the gurney and took his left python and knocked me over the barricade. So I had a couple of instances where I did run-ins and tried to save him and got Slaughter off him and tried to restore order. So I did have a couple of run-ins with him. I have a beautiful picture of him and my two sons in the locker room at the Garden, and it was kind of a funny story. I had always paid for tickets. I never asked for tickets because even though I know a lot of people did, other refs did, I never wanted to ask. I didn't want to ever jeopardize the great thing I had going. But I took my future wife and the kids one night to a show, and there were no tickets available at the Garden. I said, "What am I going to do? I can't buy a ticket off a scalper because I could get arrested." So I went up to Arnie Skolin, who I was very, very, very friendly with, and we were very close. And I said, "Arnie, I said, will you sell me a few tickets?" He goes, "What do you mean sell you tickets?" I said, "I need 3 tickets." He goes, "I'll give them to you." He said, "Why haven't you been asking for tickets? Everyone else does." I said, "Well, I never wanted to impose on you guys." So he said, No, anytime your future wife and her kids come to the show, you bring them up to me and I'll see them. So he sat in front row, and he was wonderful. Well, the youngest one was 9 in the locker room, and he kept opening and closing. I said, no, don't do this. Don't do that. They don't want to be bothered when they get a big show. So he comes over and he says, "Mom, get the camera. Hulk Hogan's out there. He's going to take a picture." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I asked him to stay there so we could come out and take a picture." I said, "Well, he's probably not there." We open the door. My son, I call him my son, he's my stepson. The 2 sons go over to him and they say, "Okay, Hulk, we're ready for the picture now." He waited and he took a picture with him, which I thought was pretty neat. I wouldn't have been able to afford the $300 today to have the picture taken, which is, I think, what he gets. But, he did take the picture. So it was kind of, that was a good experience with him. I've had a few with him, but again, over the years, he came a little bit more aloof,
You would have worked a lot of kind of enhancement type matches back in the day, and that's something that's kind of filtered out of the business. We've talked to many guys who were enhancement talent in the business. Do you think that's an element that's missing in today's products? Or would you
Not
ever
to
see it
sound
come
like a
up?
mark, but what do you mean by enhancement talent?
Well, like I don't like saying the word, but jobbers.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, if you
I'm not
said
allowed
that,
to
I
say
would.
that word. I'm not allowed to say that word. I'm not in the
Um,
business.
yeah, I know what you're saying. Um,
Yeah.
there. I hate the word jobber too. These guys work hard. They work hard to make guys look good, and that's their job. And I mean, I've heard some people comment that Johnny Rodz was a jobber. Johnny Rodz was not a jobber. He may have lost a lot of matches, but um, Jack Briscoe said Johnny Rodz could have a match with a broomstick. He'd make the broomstick look good. Johnny, and I'm just giving you one example of a jobber. Johnny, and I never considered Johnny a jobber. Johnny was the greatest tweener that ever worked. He could be a face, he could be a heel. And he was very close to Vince Sr. Vince Sr. trusted Johnny, which is one of the reasons he's in the Hall of Fame, because he broke in a lot of guys, like Eddie Gilbert that night, 21-year-old. And he would go back and report to Vince, the guy can work, the guy can't work, use him as a face, use him as a heel. So somebody on the outside who was not connected with the business might think, oh, Johnny might have been a jobber. No, far from it. And he knew he could tell a story in a match like no one I've ever seen. He had the respect of every big name in the business. He just never really did it really full time, like myself. He wasn't he had another job outside of that. And he has a great gym in New York now. He's at Gleason's gym, and he trained many, many great wrestlers over the years. He's trained a lot of really great wrestlers over the year. And another guy that I don't consider a jobber was Mike Sharp. People might say, oh, Mike was a jobber. He wasn't a jobber. Mike could wrestle. He was a good wrestler, and he could make guys look good. And I mean, that's one of the secrets in wrestling. I mean, the reason that Bigelow was so great, and of course he wasn't a jobber, but the reason that Bigelow was so great is he could make even a guy like Lawrence Taylor look good. And people don't understand that there's an art to making a guy look good. Some of the champions were not what I would consider great wrestlers, okay? But the people they work with, Ted DiBiase was another guy, and he certainly wasn't a jobber, but Ted DiBiase could make you look great. For a big man, he took some of the best bumps. I did him and Dusty one night, and what a great match. What a wonderful match, So, the enhancement wrestlers, or the enhancement wrestlers, if you want to refer to them as that, great respect for them, great admiration. S.D. Jones, a wonderful guy, well liked, respected in a business. So again, their job, the reason they're called jobbers was their job was to make the other guy look good and to put somebody over, because in those days, Vince would bring somebody new in every month and let them run the gauntlet, and then they'd leave. So you needed guys that were going to lose on TV. And then you had B wrestlers that were going to lose in the arenas, and then they'd get against the A wrestlers. There was all psychology behind that. So the jobbers had to do the TV shows and make them look good. And boy, without the jobbers, you wouldn't have had the classic era without the enhancement wrestlers, you would not have had the classic era of wrestling. And I enjoyed very much working with many of them.
Yeah, and you're right about Iron Mike Sharp. He was pushed in Mid-South, and also had a decent couple of runs in the WWF. So, yeah, and being Canadian, soft spot in my heart for him. Wanted to ask you about your involvement in the this is kind of a deep cut, but the Pro Wrestling USA, I want to call it experiment or whatnot, and maybe the younger fans aren't aware of that, but could you just discuss that for a little bit?
Sure. First of all, the greatest match I ever worked was, I believe, Bruno Sammartino. That will always be my favorite match because he was my hero growing up. My second favorite match of all times, and I probably did thousands of matches over 32 years, thousands. My second greatest match was a Pro Wrestling USA match, believe it or not. Vince had started going into the territories. Vince's father would never go into other people's territories, but Vince started going into the territories. He went on cable TV. Then he started going into territories. So the NWA, Georgia Wrestling, AWA, they all pooled together and they decided to come into New York. And I worked one of their first shows. A Magnum TA was on the show. Well, that wasn't a pro wrestling. That was actually an NWA. The pro wrestling show I'm talking about took place at a high school out in Staten Island, New York. It was Rick Martel with the AWA belt against Nick Bockwinkel. Okay. Two phenomenal workers. Okay. But what made this match so special was in the corner of Nick Bockwinkel, his manager, was the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, the first WWF champion. So I'm in the middle of a ring with three great champions. How could you ask for a better match than that? Okay. So Nick Bockwinkel, in my estimation, was a terrific worker. Martel, as you know, was a terrific worker. And then at the end of the match, Bockwinkel had his foot over the rope, and I didn't see it. At least that's what the people in the audience told me. I didn't see it. I don't know how I missed it. I usually don't miss those things, but I missed it. And I counted to three, and Bockwinkel got pinned. So Rogers came in the ring, and he was yelling at me, and I was yelling at him. And I said, I'm standing here with the first WWF champion arguing. I said, what a thrill for me. And most of the people in the audience didn't even know who he was. But for me, that match will always be very, very special because, I mean, Bockwinkel and Martel worked probably an 18-minute match without a rest hold. You know what I'm saying? It was just a phenomenal match. And working with Harley Race is another guy who was just a phenomenal. Working with the classic guys, the guys like that, really got me pumped up when I would be in a ring with people, Dusty Rhodes, Rick Steamboat, people like that.
Do you have any idea why it didn't succeed ultimately as a united front against Vince?
Yes. My thoughts would be this. The New York fan was more into the showbiz aspect of wrestling. The NWA and AWA were more into the sport aspect. And one of the reasons I liked working with them was because of the fact that they were more of a sport, more into the sport, emphasizing the sport over the showbiz or the hoopla type of thing. And I think the fans at that point were so used to seeing the WWF on TV that they didn't know who these guys were. So they had no idea. I mean, I used to follow back in the 50s when I used to wrestle on a lawn with my brother. I used to follow wrestling, and I knew that in those days that there was a Ring magazine for boxing. The last 5 pages were wrestling. And I knew there was more than one division because growing up in New England in the East Coast, you only got really the magazines were all WWF. But if you looked in the back, you'd see the NWA, AWA champions. So I knew that there was other leagues. And then I started watching Georgia wrestlings and so forth. And I liked Gordon Soley, and I enjoyed the sport aspect of it. So whenever I'd work some of their shows, but I don't think the fans were in tuned to that specific type of wrestling. They were more into the showbiz aspect of it, you might say.
You talked there briefly. You mentioned the man, and he's actually the video cover for this podcast. The Iron Sheik, a man you've great time for. Do you have any nice stories to share about him?
I have some, yes. Him and I hit it off pretty well together. And the first time I worked with the Sheik, I'm walking down the hallway. He was in a room next to me, and I'm walking down the hall, and I see this huge cloud of smoke coming out from under the door, floating down the hallway. And of course, it was a kind of smoke which would make you feel good. And I opened the door, and he's sitting on the bed, lying on a bed in his wrestling shorts with a big bong. And he goes, "Referee Dave, my favorite ref, come in, have a smoke." I said, "No, thanks." I said, "By the way, you're in a no smoking room." And he goes, "Not anymore, brother." And I said, "Well, have a good evening." And I shut the door, and I said, "I want the alarm in the hallway to go off." So a little bit later in the evening, he comes in and he's going to do a live radio broadcast over the telephone. So he comes into the room in his shorts and he goes like this and he's rubbing his chest and doing it. And I said, "Sheik, it's radio." And he says, "The Sheik, he liked to look his best, whether TV or radio." I'm going, "Oh, okay, fine. You want to look?" And he would get ribbed a little bit. We came off a plane one day, and he was waiting for he had the clubs, and he put them down, and we're waiting for our bags, and there was this real thin guy, looked really geeky, and he had a suit on, and one of the guys said to him, he said, "Sheik, you see that guy over there?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "He said he could do the clubs longer than you." And she goes, "That man said he could do the clubs longer than me." So he goes over and grabs the guy. He says, "Do the clubs." And the guy has no idea what he's talking about. This guy couldn't have picked them up with both hands, one of them. "Do the clubs." He goes, "I don't want to go to any clubs. I'm not going to any clubs with you." He goes, No, do the clubs. You say you do the clubs better than Sheiky?" And then he sees us laughing and he goes, "You son of a, you know what." But he could be, he could be basically, he could be fun to be with. Oh, there was one story one night. I'm in the ring and he uses the camel clutch to finish the match. So I said, the guy gives up, Sheik wins. Well, the camel clutch had been banned by the state athletic commission, fakish type thing, but been banned. So I called the Sheik the winner. So it was now intermission. I used to do all the matches for the independents. They wanted to save money. So I do 6, 7, 8 matches. So it's now an intermission. Well, I get out of the ring and 3 guys push me under the bleachers. It was at a high school where the bleachers come out of the wall. They pushed me under the bleachers. And these guys have been drinking heavily. And they said, "Listen, you go in the ring right now and you change that decision." And what are you talking about? They said, the camel clutch has been banned. The Sheik should have been disqualified. I said, "Did the Sheik put you up to this?" And I said, "No." And these guys were serious. They said, "You don't get in there and you change the decision, or we're going to beat the hell out of you." And I'm going, whoa. So I said, "What am I going to do?" So I said, "Well, let me tell you something. I got a call before I left for the show tonight from the state athletic commission. The Sheik is suing the commission because he can't use the hold. And the commission said he is allowed to use the hold until this is settled." So I did the right thing, because this is a total lie. But I said, I don't want to get beat up by these guys. So so they didn't know what to say, so they let me go. So I went to the locker room and I said, "Sheik, I got to ask you, did you put those?" No, I didn't put him up to that. But I thought it was probably him trying to get back at me for some of the stuff we pulled on him. But this is how the fans took it somewhat in those days. They would really I did the Sheik and Slaughter a lot on the independent circuit, which was a lot of fun too. I mean, they one night the Sheik and Slaughter were wrestling, and this local guy was going to come in and save Slaughter. He's a local big time college wrestler. He was going to come in and save Slaughter. So I was supposed to give a sign when it was time for him to come in from the ring. He was going to be standing in the back of the arena.
Yeah.
So it was time, and the kid's not standing there. So I said, "What are we going to do?" And he said, "Well, Dave, take a bump. We'll put you in the corner, and we'll throw you in the corner, and I'll go in like I'm going to hit the guy, and I'll miss him and hit you and fall down and kill some time." So I fell down to kill some time. So I said, "This guy's still not there. This is the finish." So the guy Slaughter goes, Sheik goes, "Well, this is what we'll do. We're going to do this, and then you fall down again." And finally, they said, "We'll throw you out of the ring. Go back and get him." And I said, "Well, you better do something, because I'm getting beat up in here." So the kid finally showed up, and but That was another interesting night with the Sheik. But there was one other story I wanted to tell that was really classic Sheik, and I just had it. I just had it in my mind, and now if maybe it'll come back to me. But it was a real classic one with him. Believe me.
Excellent stories.
Yeah, different. But I wish I could remember that other one because it was. Oh, I know what it was. We're in the locker room, and she goes, "I'm fighting Slaughter. We're going to get you involved. I want to get you involved, Dave. You know, a little bit high, maybe. Dave, I want to get you involved in this match because you're my favorite. I love working with you, referee Dave. I'm going to get you involved." So what are you going to do? He said, "What I'm going to do is I'm going to take off my boot. It's got the hook, you know, the hook on the boot.
Yep.
And Slaughter's going to duck, and I'm going to hit you with the hook. And then I take my blade and I slice you 3 or 4 times in the forehead." And I go, "I don't think so." I said, "Nowhere in my contract does it say I bleed. Blood stays in the no. But referee Dave, you don't understand. I want to make you look good." I said, "I think I look pretty good the way I am, but referee, you don't understand this. The people would pop." I said, No. We're going to leave the blood where it is. The forehead doesn't get sliced." And but he was serious. He wanted to slice me. I said, "I'm not letting a guy who's maybe smoked a little pot slice my forehead."
Yes,
But
that never goes well, does it?
he wanted to make me look good.
Well,
Excuse me.
blood being generally associated with money, but not in that occasion. I couldn't let this interview go by without asking you about your working the infamous Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view, which is infamous for many reasons, with the exception, I might add, of the excellent Tully Blanchard, Stan Lane match and promo. But just wanted to get your, I know you have a heck of a couple of stories associated with that event.
Well, it looked good on paper, but unfortunately, many of the workers that night had passed their prime. I had the main event, which was the main event was supposed to be Jake Roberts against Jim Neidhart. That was a semi-main event. The main event was Yokozuna against Bundy. Okay, so I had both those matches, but they decided at the last minute because Jake obviously had problems that evening. And I'm glad Jake has gotten over his problems because I really like Jake. And Jake was, I just want to tell a little story about Jake. When I did the book, Ringman, and we'll talk about it a little bit. When I did the Ringman book, I asked some of the wrestlers I worked with if they could give me a little quote for the back of the book. Johnny Raj, right off the bat, gave me a great quote. Well, some of the wrestlers, I guess, were still connected with WWE, so they didn't want to give me a quote. I guess they didn't get back to me, but Jake did. And Jake gave me a wonderful quote. He said, "To have a good match, you need a heel, a face, and a good ref." And he goes, and Dave is one of the good ones. So I have great respect for Jake. But that night, he was completely out of it, if anyone who's seen the show knows. So they decided that they would put Jake and Neidhart, and then it turned it into a tag team with Bundy and Neidhart. Well, we're getting ready to go out, and it's about 2 minutes. We're right behind the curtain, and Neidhart goes, "Dave, I'm not taking the pin." I'm going, "Huh?" I said, "Oh, the finish has been changed. What's the finish?" He goes, "I don't know, but I'm not taking the pin." Vince called me. I found out later, Vince called him and said, "Don't take the pin because you're coming back with me." So I said, "Well, you're not taking a pin." I said, "What are we going to do for a finish?" He says, "I don't know. It's up to you." I said, "Not up to me. I'm not going to tell people what to do. What do you think? Yoko's going to get pinned by Jake?" So, all right. So we go in the ring and we had no finish. And I'm going, this is not good. This could be here a while. So I said to Bundy, who was very, very friendly with Bundy. Bundy would always say to me, I'd say, "Hey, Bundy, how are you? Nice to see you." "Mr. Bundy to you, Dwinell." That was always his thing. But I said, "Bundy, throw me out of the ring. I'll pretend I'm hurt. They'll have to have another ref come out and let him deal with it. I don't want to deal with this." Bundy said, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it." So Bundy said, "Just do what I tell you." So Bundy gets in the ring, not the legal man, pushes Jake down, falls on him, and I go 1, 2, 3. He says count 1, 2, 3, and I didn't have the legal men in the ring. But I had to do something. We might still be there today. So anytime I discuss this, or not anytime I discuss it, but on the internet, all over the internet, they said that ref's terrible. They weren't the legal men. And I certainly knew that. And any time anybody asked me, I'll say, well, what do you want me to do? I said, I'd still be there now. I wouldn't be here talking to you. I'd be in the ring waiting for a finish. So basically, that's what happened in the match. But it's a kind of like a night I would like to forget. I was pumped up for it, and it was on a riverboat, or not a riverboat, a floating casino in Biloxi, Mississippi. And we'd had a lot of fun the night before. I was sitting with Snooker and Lou Albano and a bunch of other guys, and we were having it. We got up on stage with the Shirelles, a group from the 60s, a teen group from the 60s. They called us up on stage, and Lou and myself and I forget who else were pretending we were the Rockettes and doing high kicks, and we had a lot. So I mean, I enjoyed being with the guys, but I didn't enjoy the matches, obviously, and it got panned as the lowest rated and worst pay-per-view of all times. And I tried to make the matches interesting, and I got panned on some of the websites. I said that referee was terrible. Sherry Martel hit Steele right in front of him, and he didn't disqualify her for hitting him with a chair outside the ring. Well, if that's not the finish, what the hell am I going to do? I'm going to disqualify him and screw up the finish. So people don't realize that you kind of got to do things sometime, and even if it makes you look bad, you got to go with the flow, because the promoter's running a show and he's telling you what he wants for the finish, and you can't just change it on the fly. But it was a night that I probably would like to forget. But you take the good with the bad.
Well, yeah, and it's obviously become a cult classic phenomenon over the years for whatever reason. But Dave, before we hit the top of the hour, we've talked a lot about your book, Ringman. Where can the fans purchase that? Check it out.
Well, there's two places. There's a number of places you can get it. Amazon is one. It's in Kindle. I tried to keep it. I tried to keep the book. It was written for fans of all ages, but I try to keep the book as cheap as I could. I'm not looking to make a killing on it. I wanted to share all these wonderful stories and experiences like I've been sharing with you today. And the book is called Ringman. You can get it on Amazon, but I found out, since Amazon had kind of sold out of several of the copies they had on hand, it'll say it's out of stock, but can get it. That means that they're going to go to my publishing company, the company that prints the books for me. They'll go to them, so it'll take them maybe a week or two to get it. But if anybody's interested in the book, they can go to bookbaby.com, BOOKBABY, one word, .com, and put in. You can put in, even in Google, bookbaby.com, Ringman Dave Dwinell, and it should take you to that. Or if you get to the BookBaby page, they can get it out to you right away. Or they have the Kindle also. The Kindle is, I think, $5.95. The book itself is $14.95. There's 40 pictures, about 295 pages, a lot of stories about a lot of great stories about the early days of the 80s and 90s. And, I think it's done. It's about me, but it's not about me. It's more about the business. And it was Slam Wrestling from Canada gave it a really fine review and said, Dave tells a story like we're sitting in a bar with him and he's telling these stories like I've been talking to you tonight. And again, I didn't even put my picture on the cover. I got a picture of the ring kind of covered in smoke because, again, I think the stories are more important than even myself. And who knows, if I put my picture on the cover, it might have scared a few people away. I don't know. But at any rate, it was a lot of fun writing it. And I've been retired 10 years. I never did this full time, by the way. I had a legitimate job, if you want. I was the receiver of taxes, an elected official for a good number of years for one of the largest towns in New York State. I did this evenings, weekends, summers, did a lot of fairs in the summertime. I always did it part-time. I asked the chief one night, I said, hey, they're looking for full-time reps. What do you think? Should I try? And he said, you got a good job? Yeah. You got a pension? Yeah. You got medical benefits? Yeah. He goes, what are you, nuts? So I never did it full time, but again, I had a chance to observe what was going on. as like a third party observer. And I kept all my programs. So in writing the book, I knew who I worked with, some of the better matches, the dates of the matches. So I was able to be precise in the book as far as that's concerned. A lot of good pictures, and nobody gets thrown under the bus. I didn't knock any wrestlers. There was a couple people in the business I wasn't particularly fond of, and they're not in the book because I'm not going to knock anybody. The business was good to me. And I'm not going to knock today's business. The people always ask me, compare the yesterday to today. You can't. The wrestlers are bigger, they're quicker, they're faster. They'll say, who was tougher? Well, I wouldn't want to pick a fight with any of them. To be honest with you, I'm not going to say one was tougher than the other. The old guys were pretty tough. These new guys can be tough because they're bigger and faster. But they're certainly doing something right because they're packing the arenas. I'm just very happy I was in at a time and a place where I got to work with a lot of characters. And it was a wonderful experience for 32 years. And it made a very ordinary, I mean, if someone were to look at me with at work with my suit and tie and my little briefcase, they'd say, oh, that guy's a real geek. But it let me be somebody else. I go in the locker room and I put on a blue shirt and a bow tie or the striped shirt, and I become someone else. I become a guy that could go in a ring and order these guys around. And I became almost like a Superman or Clark Kent or somebody who appears to be one thing but ends up being another. So it was a wonderful experience. And just working with so many marvelous wrestlers and promoters and fans. I mean, the fans, without the fans, we were nothing. And I loved the intimacy with the fans in those days, in the small arenas and the in the small clubs. I love the intimacy with the fans because, again, without the fans, we're nothing. We were nothing. I always respected the fans. Sometimes my ego would get a little high, and I'd always be taken back down. I was out in front of I think the Ridgewood Grove, an old arena in Queens, and some of the kids were asking for autographs from me, and I was feeling pretty high. It was raining, but I gave autographs. And after the 15th or 16th autograph for the kids, I said, I'm really not anybody famous. Why do you want my autograph? And they go, well, you're not really anybody famous, but you're better than nobody. So
that's a ringing endorsement.
Let a kid bring you, and you're the only free one. That was it. You're the only free one, and you're better than nobody. That's what they had said. You're the only free one. You're better than nobody. So leave it to kids to bring you back down to earth. But a lot of great experience, and I appreciate and please thank Maurice for inviting me and for yourself for having me on the show. And it's been a lot of fun.
Well, Dave, we certainly appreciate your time and encourage all the fans to check out the book. We will put the information that you provided in terms of ordering in the description of this video, and want to thank you once again for your time and for sharing so many great stories.
Can I mention one last thing? One of the reasons I wrote the book is because I think people today have lost the ability to dream. I had a dream as a young kid wrestling with my brother on the front lawn that someday I'd end up in a ring. And I pursued that. And even though I had doors shut in my face, I wanted it bad enough that I pursued it. And I'm not saying this because I'm somebody great, but I'm saying if you have a dream and you want to do something in life, don't be afraid to try it out, and don't be discouraged if people shut the door in your face. And I think that was another reason I wrote the book, was to tell people that, don't be afraid to go after something if you want to. Who the hell would have ever thought that I would end up in a ring with my heroes that I used to pretend I was wrestling on the lawn as a 12-year-old kid?
Absolutely. Very, very uplifting story all the way around. So, Dave, once again, thank you very much for your time this afternoon, sir.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, fans, that's it for this edition of the Cheap Heat Productions Wrestling Podcast. For Maurice, I'm Jack Kilby saying thanks for viewing. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and also the notification so that you keep on top of all the great content we have coming this year, including this interview. But until next time, take care, everybody.